Empire.
Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Con Report wherever you get your podcast. You're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You know the drill. You can find us there as part of Empire Media, AMPIRE. I suggest, today's not going to be a football podcast. So if you want football, go back and listen to the live stream show with Bram Weinstein and I, Voice of the Commanders, as we talk about the playoff push, all sorts of questions that were answered. We talk about the quarterback, but many, many other positions as well, many other topics as well. So there you're going to get your football fix. Today, it's about the release of the report from Congress. And I know people want to stick with football. This is a big deal. This is news. So we're going to discuss it today, and we're going to get back to football for the next podcast. Again, I'm going to have a roundtable with some reporters for next week. I do have interviews with Derek Forrest, Sam Howell, just to get an update on him. I know people are interested in him. Maybe not for right now, but for the future. Where's he at? I talked to him about it. So there's plenty of football stuff to come. So give me about 15 minutes today to talk about the release of this report again, because it does impact this franchise. It does impact a lot of things. So I'm going to have Tisha Thompson on from ESPN. She's going to join me in about a couple minutes to talk about the report. She authored the report that came out today. She and I have been working on this story for more than a year. So, we both have in-depth knowledge of all that's going on. We've seen the reports. We've seen the depositions. There were hundreds and hundreds of pages. So stay tuned for that. I did want a couple things along with these reports that we really didn't get into, and a couple highlights that I wanted to go into. One, former team president Bruce Allen said that the NFL council told him that there was the team was responsible for this John Gruden leaks. I know a lot of people have wondered. That's what Allen said in his deposition. Dan Snyder said that he should have fired Bruce Allen instead of Brian Lafemina back in 2018. At the end of that year, and Lafemina, of course, came in to fix up the business side. There were a lot of things that Lafemina said in his deposition that he told Snyder that had to change, and he said that Snyder seemed amenable to those changes. Anyway, but Snyder said he should have done that. Somebody, Andy Pollin, longtime broadcaster in the area, said, when I tweeted that out, said that, hey, it reminded him of when Snyder said he should have fired Norv Turner instead of Charlie Cashley. That's something that I had way back in the day. Remember being told that Snyder actually admitted to Charlie Cashley. Anyway, it's just another one. So there you go. And then Snyder also said that when Bruce Allen had the infamous press conference where he said it's a damn good culture, and Allen said in his deposition that he was referring to the football side of things and that he didn't want to make it seem to the players and coaches that things were horrible for them. Anyways, Snyder said when he watched that, and later he told his wife that things needed to change. Whatever, that's what he said. So there you go. He also said that in his deposition that Ron Rivera was doing, quote, a marvelous job. And he said he did not testify on June 22nd when Roger Goodell did, because there was a festival. As we know, he was over in Cannes, over in France and I believe it was some sort of marketing festival. There were awards that night, but he said that the team had entered into a category based on their rebrand and how that was handled and how that went. So that's what they were there for. Anyways, those are some of the highlights that we didn't get to, but with Tisha, I talk about the big picture items, the impact of this. Is this the end? What's more? What more is going on? And we'll get into all that. So here's my conversation with ESPN reporter Tisha Thompson. Well, Tisha, the report comes out. It's Thursday. The report comes out, and I'm just curious. You've been working on this story. You and I have been working on the story for a year. What was your big takeaway from how the report was classified?
I think there were two things. I think that the committee report firmly and very pointedly puts blame on Dan Snyder. It references Snyder specifically, doesn't always deflect to his attorneys, says this was Snyder. Snyder was in charge of this and was working to interfere in the investigation, obstruct the investigation. and really points the finger at him. I think the other thing that is different from what we've heard from the committee in the past is the amount of responsibility that's been placed on the NFL as well, that this is not just limited to Dan Snyder and his team, that this was actually also the responsibility of the NFL. And the report flat out says the NFL failed its employees by not protecting them from intimidation and not letting them feel like they could speak up about things like sexual harassment without fear of retaliation.
And you had talked to Representative Carolyn Maloney, who was the chairwoman for this, and that was her take too. But what else? What did she tell you about that? Why did they? What more did they feel like the NFL could have done in this?
Well, I think for Maloney, it really comes down to this document that you and I reported on in February. It's called a common interest agreement. And at the time, we weren't sure if this was a normal course of business or if this was unusual. I have since had a very highly placed source who really understands this stuff tell me this is unusual, that this common interest agreement is not part of the regular course of business between the league and a team. And what Maloney contends is it essentially hamstrung the league from being able to release upwards of more than 40,000 documents related to the internal investigation that was conducted by Beth Wilkinson that was supposed to, and the NFL and the team said, was going to look into the allegations of the employees who had come forward about sexual harassment in the toxic workplace culture. But what Maloney says is, while the NFL claimed that that was what this was going to do, behind the scenes, Wilkinson couldn't do her job. She wasn't allowed to interview very critical witnesses because they were not released from their non-disclosure agreements. In fact, that Snyder, through his lawyers, actually worked to prevent Wilkinson through court proceedings from interviewing these women. So it wasn't just NDAs, it was also court proceedings. And that by doing this, there was no way that the public was ever going to find out what Wilkinson found in her investigation. And so for Maloney, that is really a key takeaway, that the NFL couldn't release information because Snyder, through this common interest agreement, essentially had veto power over everything that the NFL releases about this.
There was also the talk, and she even said that she told you she'd seen nothing like this during her time there.
Which is a statement, John, because
right.
she has been on Capitol Hill as a congresswoman for 3 decades. She has been doing this a long time. She is one of the most powerful people on Capitol Hill. She was the first woman to ever take over the oversight committee. So for her to say she's never seen anything like this, that's not something to stick your nose up in the air about. That's a pretty serious statement coming from Capitol Hill.
The other part is the intimidation aspect. Now, I know there was the lawsuit with that MEA WW in India, that's what Dan Snyder says he was doing, collecting information on people. Clearly, there's a disagreement about that aspect of it, if you can go into that.
Right. So Snyder and his attorneys have contended from the very beginning that they compiled what the committee calls a 100-page dossier, that it was a PowerPoint presentation that had, and the committee released some of the images from this PowerPoint presentation that had photographs of people who had come forward in the Washington Post series that started all of this in 2020, along with photographs of reporters at the Washington Post and others. And it was full of details that the committee contends were collected by private investigators because Snyder wanted to create a list, an enemies list, so to speak, of who was talking to the media. Snyder's camp has always contended, no, this was only about this defamation lawsuit that we filed in India, and this is unrelated. The committee spends pages trying to punch holes in that defense, and has said for some time now, and it came out initially in their June report, that India lawsuit isn't about defamation. It was about trying to figure out who spoke to the Washington Post, including trying to get information on Bruce Allen. And John, to the report that came out today is really revealing, because it has so much of what Bruce Allen testified to in his deposition, because Snyder has been trying to blame Allen for the workplace culture since the very beginning. And this was the first time we've heard back about what Allen had to say.
And one of the interesting things that was in the story, but when you're going over the report, there was his exchange with some of the private investigators and just his experience with that, which of course then Dan Snyder, and I think it was the report said more than 100 times said, I can't recall or I don't know. And that was one of the things he said he didn't know if they had assigned or hired PIs to follow people. But Allen's exchange was key in there.
Allen's exchange is probably the most intriguing anecdote. Different people have testified throughout the investigation that they had different reactions to the private investigators. There was a former cheerleader who said she was frightened. She had children in her home, and there was a strange man, of which we were able to finally see video of, knocking on her neighbor's door, trying to collect information of her. Allen had a slightly different perspective on it. In his testimony, he says that his wife became uncomfortable, that there was a car that had been sitting outside of their house the night before. She spots it again early in the morning. They live in a place where that's unusual. The car shouldn't normally be there. And so Allen makes a cup of coffee, walks out with his coffee and says, what are you doing here? And they, long story short, say, well, we're here to watch you. And that's one thing that private investigators were following Bruce Allen. We knew about that. The other thing that Bruce Allen says about private investigators is he recalls in his testimony that during the height of the kneeling controversy over the national anthem, Snyder was actively trying to get rid of NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell, and says to Bruce Allen, I want to get I'm paraphrasing, I want to get private investigators to follow the NFL commissioner. For us, that was important because, as you know, we reported in October for the first time that Snyder has been bragging to associates that he's been collecting dirt on owners and Goodell. And here was one of Snyder's closest associates testifying under oath in a congressional deposition that Snyder had told him something to that effect.
And along those lines, too, Allen said that he and Stephen Choi, their former CFO, that Snyder sent them up to New York to look over Goodell's contract. And that was around the same time, too, was it not?
Well, I'm going to take your word for it, because this is the part where we disclose that you read almost 300 pages of the deposition while I was trying to process the report.
And I
you
read
know more about that.
Right.
This is how teamwork works, right?
Right.
So, the Bruce Allen testimony is very interesting, especially for those of us who've been trying to understand what the heck was going on behind closed doors.
And then the other part is the Republicans then release a memorandum with, I guess, basically rebutting a lot of this, or saying that, again, they've maintained from the beginning that it was all a sham, that it was one-sided. What else did you see from what they released today, shortly before noon?
So I'm still trying to figure all this out. So this is still a work in progress, but we've begun to publish on it. So here's what I've got right now that I can share. As we always do, we reach out for comment. We reached out to comment to the team, and we reached out for comment to the NFL. The team responded and has given us its statement since, but initially the team forwarded what's called a memorandum that came from the Republicans, and we received a copy of it from the Republicans on the Oversight Committee as well. So we have it from two sources, and both versions contain about 20-some pages of why the Republicans have always believed that this was not an investigation worthy of the Oversight Committee. And they give all the reasoning, and they give all of their side of the story, so to speak. But at the very end of it, there's an attachment of exhibits that the memo says was 57 emails that were sent and received from Bruce Allen's email account when he was with the team. We've previously reported that the team culled about 300,000 emails from Bruce Allen's computer after he left. And within these 50 some emails that are presented as exhibits and have essentially been publicly released now to the media, are more than 24 images of naked women. And I'm currently trying to figure that out. And my understanding as of right this moment is that it may include some of images of some of the women who are part of the 40 employees that have been represented by Katz and Bank, the attorneys who've been speaking out on behalf of the women who have been at the center of this from the very beginning. So I've never run into that before, where Congress is releasing images of naked women. That's new.
It is,
and I'm trying to wrap my head around it, John.
and I would imagine that too, if for any of the women who are involved in this to see that again, it's going to bring up feelings that they just want to put behind them.
Well, I've asked for statements, right? Like what I'm not going to do is assume. I never assume what anyone is thinking. And so I have reached out to some of the women that have been at the heart of all of this. I've reached out to Banks and Katz to see, and when I know what they have to say, believe me, John, you're going to know too.
Right, and there's a lot more to go on there. What do you think the impact of this report is and will be?
So I think this is a chapter that is ending in a much bigger story. So while the congressional investigation is concluding, because the Republicans, as you have reported and I have reported, have indicated that they are not going to pursue this investigation anymore. Representative James Comer from Kentucky, a Republican, is taking over control of the Oversight Committee in January. So for Congress, this is it. It's done. There is possible legislation that could be rolled out, but it would be dependent on lawmakers who are going to continue to be in Congress in January, sponsoring that legislation, because the legislation so far that's been sponsored dealing with NDAs and stadium financing, those lawmakers are leaving office at the end of this month. So Congress is done for the most part, but 14 months of the congressional investigation has spurred so many other government investigations. I mean, just quickly off the top of my head, the DC Attorney General has its civil lawsuit right now based on many of the allegations that are repeated in the congressional investigation. The Virginia Attorney General is doing an investigation into the allegations of financial improprieties that came out during the congressional investigation. The U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia is pursuing a criminal inquiry based on reporting, or based on two sources that we first reported a couple of weeks ago. And then the league itself is doing the Mary Jo White investigation, which was announced the day of the February roundtable, where women came forward, including Tiffany Johnston, who said Snyder had put his hand on her thigh. So that Mary Jo White investigation it'll be interesting to see if that is the NFL's let's try this again.
Right.
We were hamstrung with Wilkinson. So let's see what happens with Mary Jo White. Will it be more of the same, or will this be a different version of event?
There's a lot more to go.
We can't predict. It'll be really interesting to see what happens. So this is not done. You and I have lots more reporting.
We do. And I think the other thing too is in the Republicans, their memorandum, they included testimony from Brian LaFemina, who was an executive here a few years ago, was fired, and then also Bruce Allen, both of whom denied any knowledge of it. They walked through some of the auditing process, and that term juice that I think Jason Friedman brought up, as far as like how they classified the extra money, they said they weren't familiar with that term. Just to be clear on that one. But so there's more to go on that one as well.
That Jason Friedman testimony is really, I think, the generator behind a lot of the other government investigations that are now beginning to churn, not least of which the criminal inquiry happening with the U.S. Attorney's Office.
And I think just a couple other things too, within Dan Snyder's his deposition, it's pretty clear that he was looking forward with this organization. And because he mentioned a few times about being excited for it, and excited for the future. That vestry light, report about how it is now was a big deal. And then a couple months later, now the team's up for sale. So that was just, I kind of was struck by the enthusiasm for the future. And then a couple months later, team up for sale.
I've been struck from the very beginning at how quickly things change with this team and with what Snyder has said. And, folks always say, well, Snyder said, I never. If we, if anyone ever does a 30 for 30 on this, I would suggest the title Never Say Never, because he said I would never change the name of the team. Well, as we know, financial pressure brought on the change of the team's name. And he said, well, I'll never sell the team. And we are in a moment right now. Does never mean never. And I think what is important for folks to understand, because I always ask this question whenever I'm talking to any of these folks that are part of the government investigations, is if he sells the team, is that the end of it? And at least for the DC Attorney General, it is not. That these are events that took place under Snyder's watch, and that this is a lawsuit that's been filed against Snyder and the league. So whether Snyder sells the team or not, that case, for instance, would continue if it doesn't get dismissed, or if, folks continue to pursue it.
Tisha, anything else we need to know about this at this point? There's so much there.
There's so much there. It is a super dense read. And, I'm always of the opinion, read the thing. If you really, really want to know, read the thing. We have put the entirety of the 79-page report on our website. If you look up the story that we published today, Thursday, about the final report, you can read the report yourself. And you can draw your own conclusions. And that's what I always encourage everyone to do. You and I try really hard to synthesize it and make it understandable and put it in context. But if you really care about this team, you should read this report.
Tisha, thank you very much. Great job. And always, people got to know, this is one of my favorite reporters to ever talk to. Can
I give a shout out to you, John? I will tell anyone and everyone that you are a jewel of a human being, and you have one of the toughest jobs in sports. You do it with such class, and I am so proud to be your colleague. Thank you for having me on the podcast.
Tisha, it's awesome. Thank you very much. Great job. And you got a lot of other responsibilities today, so get to
I'll be on the phone with you real soon, probably.
Awesome. Very good. Thank you, Tisha.
All right. Talk to you.
Thanks to Tisha for joining me, and thank you, as always, for listening. I'll be back, I don't know if it's Friday or Monday morning, with another show. This time, it will be back to football. Again, Derek Forrest, Sam Howell. Tune in. There you go. Thank you for joining me, and I'll talk to you next time.